While you weren't looking, the SEC and Big Ten consolidated all the power in the sport. Most of it. The college football playoff, a new CEO of all of college sports. We'll get into it. And we'll give you coaches facing the most pressure in 2025. One of those guys, Brent Venables. Why and what can the head Sooners man do to change it? Plus, Chapel Bill isn't feeling the heat quite yet, but the clock is still ticking. How long will he and his 6 Super Bowl rings last in college football? All that and more as the college football show, Ultimate College Football Show, starts right now. Welcome into the Ultimate College Football Show. He is Smoke Dixon. I am Emily Proud, and there is a lot to get to today. But first, I want to remind you to hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed to the channel. That's what keeps what we're doing free here, and that's what everybody wants to see. But there is so much to discuss on this show. I know it's the off season, but this is where the big changes happen in the sport, and we're starting to see that potentially with a new playoff expansion. Let's get into our water cooler talk here on the show and talk about what everybody is discussing with the sport. So before we get into this proposed expanded playoff, the big key here is that it's being pushed by 2 conferences, the SEC in the Big Ten. So how is what we're seeing here a big example of just this consolidation of power with the 2 most powerful leagues in the sport?
Well, it's big banks take everybody's money out of the little bank. And what you're having is you're going to get the SEC and Big Ten invitational. Mm-hmm. They just want to get their 4th or 5th best team into this playoff system, which is unfair. But when you sign up for it and the little guys sign up to the big boys, you got to play by their rules because there's no room to negotiate when the big bank says it's time to give me that money.
Yeah, and this was something that was kind of going to come to a head eventually because we had our first iteration of the expanded college football playoff. We knew that that was not going to last necessarily, and the other conferences had to sign this memorandum of understanding that the SEC and Big Ten would essentially get to decide what the future of the sport looks like. And so it seems like they are fully taking advantage of that. This is something that could come to a head as soon as this week, maybe later this month. We could find out there is a 14 or a 16 team playoff. So before we get into what that might actually look like, what do you think of the idea of further expanding the playoff? It feels like something we just do every day now.
Devalues the regular season. Devalues rivalries. And it really, truly devalue the reason why people watch college football. And that's just a week-to-week interaction of you can't lose. And if you lose, you might be out of it. So you're going to see load management start coming up. And when you start having load management, your best players might opt out not to play in the game that means the most to us, fans. The rivalry game that we wake up and say, you know what? This is Bama versus Auburn. It means something to this state. But in the grand scheme of things, this has nothing to do with college football playoffs. So we're going to keep our best players out just so we can get ready to play. In conference championships, throw that out the window too, because we're just trying to get in and finish in at 4 and finish this game out.
Yeah, there's a big trickle-down effect with this when it comes to the conference championships, the regular season, all that. We'll get into it. But first, I want to show you what a proposed 16-team playoff would look like, because they're not just adding extra schools for fun. They're adding extra schools from the SEC and the Big Ten. So it would grant 4 automatic qualifiers to each SEC and Big Ten, 2 to the ACC and Big 12, 1 to the highest-ranked group of 5 team, and 1 or 3 at-large spots, depending on the numbers, if we go to a 14 or a 16-team playoff. This is what we talk about when we say the consolidation of power. What do you think when you see more SEC, more Big Ten in this postseason tournament?
Finishing the top 4 and you're in. Mm-hmm. Well, that creates zero competitive advantage for the little schools outside of wanting to get in. Because we can look at it, it's a 9-3 team getting in, potentially an 8-4 team getting in, just however it lays out. And just we have to be careful of just oversaturating your audience with just average play during the most critical time of the year, which is the regular season, and telling us the only time that truly matters is the playoffs.
Yeah, because it might not necessarily be getting in better teams and more teams with the opportunity to win the national championship. It's just to make the postseason tournament longer and what you hope, which is more exciting. But there's an interesting piece, too, with the great reporting that was done by Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports, and that it's not just this expanded playoff that they're in communication with. The SEC and the Big Ten are also talking about a new scheduling format where they could schedule some games between the two conferences. Also, we could potentially finally get a 9-game conference schedule for the SEC. But the thing specifically I want to ask you about is, what does this do to conference championship weekend? There's talk of blowing that all up and changing what that layout looks like. What do you think it should look like?
What it's going to look like is just turn your TV off, and conference championship weekends means nothing. So again, as a true fan, you're missing out on going down to Atlanta and having a great college football weekend where college conference play don't matter anymore. So again, the fans are the ones that's missing out. The competitive side of players, you're losing out in that as well too, because I'm not working towards anything other than getting into the top 4 if I'm in the SEC or the Big Ten. So you're losing me in my competitive advantage to finish out the year and win a conference championship, which meant something at one point.
It's time for some College Football Confidential with John Talty. Our topic today is courtesy of our Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports, who wrote an in-depth story about the CEO of college sports. And so we want to know what the heck that means. For that, we bring in John Talty. John, we've long wanted a commissioner of this sport. So what is a CEO of college sports?
Well, I'll start. It is not a commissioner. I think that's a good starting point. I think this ideally is going to be a person who is overseeing the House settlement. The plan at this point is to, because of the named parties in the lawsuit, without getting too in the weeds here, break out into a separate LLC to manage the House settlement, which is the money, which is obviously a huge component of it. But I think in this particular, one of the big components is going to be the management of enforcement. All the alleged violations and recruiting improprieties that we hear about. For the last year or so, none of that has been enforced because of a lawsuit that was filed in Tennessee, state of Virginia against the NCAA. So this person is going to be, overseeing the money distribution and also having a big role in the enforcement area. So it's not going to be an all-powerful person. It's not going to be the king of college football, but it is going to be a very important role because of the two key things that are involved with it. And I think, how that person is chosen and also how they handle those topics will be really interesting to see.
Yeah, so it's a money managing position at the end of the day. But one thing that college football has always been bad or good about is hiding money. And how are we allocating the funds to everybody? Because you can say the school is getting $20 million. Now the AD has to allocate 7 or whatever percentage that he wants to whatever sports. But then you're going to have 2 other schools that says, you know what, I can find a booster that's going to give me $30 million. So what is that money manager or the CEO really going to do with the way that the funds are being allotted or how these deals are getting done, particularly with players?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question here, John, is when you say enforcement, I shudder a little bit because the NCAA has not managed to be able to enforce anything as of late, hence all of these lawsuits that we're seeing. So how much power will this new CEO and this new LLC actually have over the sport?
Yeah, I think that's the multi-billion-dollar question, specifically with this position. I think that if you go back to your point, Emily, the NCAA's enforcement team, they haven't been able to do anything, not for a lack of trying or effort or desire, though they've been completely sidelined. And so I think what's interesting about this is, A, you're essentially going to create 2 different enforcement teams because the NCAA enforcement team is not just going to disappear. They're going to focus on some different things and take away the NIL enforcement and those kind of things, but they're still going to be there. And then you're going to have this separate entity in terms of how they're going to enforce fair market value and what that means for a deal. I've talked to multiple lawyers who have said that they're going to legally challenge that. That's an interesting component. To the point that Smoke made, there are going to be schools. One thing we know about college football is that people are going to try to push the limits in everything they do. So in the SEC, in the Big Ten, if you're telling them there's a $20 million cap and they're used to spending more than that, they're going to find ways around it. They're going to push it to the absolute nth degree. And how this person tries to police that amid what will likely be legal challenges, upset boosters, ADs, coaches, it's going to be really hard. And I think that's what's so challenging about this position and what this kind of post-House settlement assuming it's approved, will look like, is that you right now you have programs used to kind of doing whatever they want because there's been no enforcement. Now, if you actually try to tell them, hey, that deal for an offensive lineman that you're paying them $300,000, that doesn't hold up to fair market value, well, they're going to probably legally challenge that, or they're going to get really mad. And how they handle that is going to be fascinating to play out.
And that's where fair market value comes into play. Who's fair market value?
Who determines that? What is it?
What is it? Because Wisconsin's fair market value for an offensive lineman is different from Ohio State, Penn State, or even Alabama's. So when that guy or that person is on the outside looking in, and you're telling the general manager, head coach, DPP, that this person is not as good as that one, so you can't give that person $1.5 million, they're going to fight that all day and say, it's not justified. You're not giving us a chance to really play and truly compete at a high level. So now you're going to go into more of an issue of what is fair market value. It's changed for everybody.
Well, I think that's like the big question, right? John is determining what is fair market value.
Yeah, exactly. The point that I was going to make was, I talked to one lawyer who told me, are you really going to tell Phil Knight that a deal that he constructs for an Oregon player doesn't hold up to fair market value? The greatest probably sports marketer of all time. I mean, guy that Smoke knows, Kevin Plank, Maryland alum, Under Armour CEO, has been doing sports marketing deals for a long time. Are you going to tell him a deal that he comes up with doesn't hold up to fair market value? Like, those guys know what the value is themselves. So that is inherently going to be, that third party determining factor of whether it is and isn't. It's going to just lead to a lot of upset feelings and controversy, and something that's probably not going to be squared away for a while.
And kind of the underbelly of all of this is something that you mentioned with somebody's fair market value at Wisconsin might be different than Alabama. This kind of highlights all the inequities because not every school is going to engage in this new cap number this close to the $20 million. So where do you see, John, the inequities in the sport really come to play and what this new body is going to look at as we continue to see the SEC and the Big Ten really stretch out ahead of others?
Yeah, I think the have and have not discussion's been going on for a while. I think this further widens the gap as to whether a school is capable of affording that $20 million. And here's an important thing to consider. That number is going to go up as the years go on, as revenue continues to increase. So it's not a static $20 million number. That can go up to $25 million, $30 million, and on and on and on, as we've seen the salary cap grow in the NBA and NFL and things like that. So it's going to be really challenging for certain schools. I think it will probably force schools to reconsider what their goals are, what their aspirations are. I could see some schools deciding, you know what, we might have our best shot of being really good in baseball. Why don't we devote a little bit more of the resources from the settlement to that? Or, a school that's maybe really good at basketball and football, let's put a little bit more in basketball. We have a shot to make a run here. It's going to be a lot of challenging things, even within the schools that are planning on spending the full 20. But I think, the SEC and Big Ten have been breaking away for a while. I think you're going to see that continue to happen. They're going to want, not to segue too far here, but they're going to want more playoff bids and things like that. This all kind of fits into that overall idea of certain conferences being really well suited from a financial standpoint moving forward, and others, smaller conferences, really going to struggle in some areas to be competitive at the highest level.
The more and more we're trying to get to the word parity, the further and further away we're getting from truly competitive play. Mm-hmm. And what you're looking at is there are schools that are going to start devaluing what the regular season looks like. And they're going to truly start devaluing what the winning programs at your school really need. And when you start saying, well, you don't need that much, how do you know that? How do you know my pain and my cries if I'm not sitting out there crying out to you? So the allocation of the funds might seem right, and it sounds good right now that we're talking about it today. But when it comes down to it and the bare knuckles of it all, is that nobody truly has the answers to any of this. And it's going to take a long time. There's some incredible people sitting in the room, because I don't think you can do it just with one person. It's going to take a collective group to really sit down and get this thing right, because everyone has a different wants and needs to get their program going in the right direction.
Yeah, and as we continue to see college sports change, and specifically, we talk obviously college football. It is the ultimate college football show. I don't want fans to be forgotten in all of this because I do think that that's the most important part of this sport and the lifeblood, really. And so, John, as much as we enjoy these conversations and talking about the future of the sport and rev share and money, and I'm not sure if everybody enjoys you mentioning all the lawyers that you were able to talk to. They're like, how does this actually affect me? So where do you see maybe the trickle-down effect for fans to feel that impact, whether that's their favorite player could be suspended if they have penalties, or they might not be able to get their favorite player because they've run out of cap space. How does this affect the fan?
Yeah, what's interesting about probably the last 5 years of college football is that these issues pop up. They're always very heavy in legalese, and they frankly at times sound kind of boring. And it takes a year or so for the fans to see the actual impact of it and realize, oh, wait, that was a huge deal. I mean, even NIL is a great example of that. All of the long trials and tribulations, and now we're seeing it's forever changed the sport. So I think the biggest areas, you've hit on some of them. I think it's about getting players, not being able to retain certain players, whether there are, again, deals that get rejected that right now are going through. Everyone wants their team to be successful. And so in theory, this could impact your team for the better or for the worse. I think maybe the underreported aspect of this, and I'll go back to Smoke because he was at Maryland. Some schools like Maryland have been nowhere near the $15 million or so number that some of these football programs are now going to be able to use for their, acquiring players and retaining players. So for some schools, this is a major infusion of money, and you might see your program get guys that you're not used to them getting in the past. So there's going to be positives of it. There'll be negatives. And again, I think it's going to take a year or two to figure out exactly how it fully impacts. Again, I'll come back to the NIL. It's taken a couple years for us to figure out exactly how it impacted. And I think one thing I'll say to kind of close it up, we saw with NIL that first year, some programs were really ready to go and they had a smart plan and they were very aggressive. Others fell behind. I think one of the things I'm most fascinated about, and as a fan, I'd be very fascinated about is my athletic department, is my program ready to go from day one of house settlement, or are we going to fall behind and take a year or two to catch up? That's something as a fan I think you're going to want to pay close attention to.
Yeah, here's where we struggle for the fans. My ability to afford a ticket for my family to go in there and watch a game. And when you watch college football and the fandom sticks in, you talk about rivalry games. We're going away from that because you might not have your best player. Your best player might not care about the game, or your coach might not care about it. And what college football brought to us was the accessibility to our players. How can we get our hands around them? How can we be around them? We can go to the spring game. We can go to the game that most people won't go to because it's the FBS program playing the FCS program. I can afford that ticket. But when you start talking about rev sharing, ticket prices are going up just because you have to fill that collective, the average fan's going to say, you know what, I might just stay at home and watch this. And then you're going to see stadiums start being empty and no one's going to show up. So be careful of what we're asking for and how we want to get there, and not looking out for the most important people in this, and it's the fans, because they're the ones that bring everything to the table. And that's the reason why most of us go out there and want to play for them.
Yeah, the University of Tennessee is not the only school doing this, but definitely got a lot of attention for adding that 10% tax to help anticipate all the new changes that come with rev share. Let's finish here because I want to hear some actual names of who could potentially be this next CEO, but we did not do the greatest job of selling this position during this segment. Whoever takes this job has certainly a lot that they have to deal with. So, John, who are some potential names that might take this CEO role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a job that comes with a lot of obligations. And I think that the most important thing, for whoever is a candidate for this is going to be determining how much power do I really have? How much leeway do I have to really do the things that I think are necessary? Or, the word puppet is too strong, but am I essentially a figurehead in some ways to these really powerful people behind the scenes, or these powerful commissioners like Greg Sankey in the SEC or Tony Petitti in the Big Ten? That, to me, I think is going to really impact the candidate pool. We've seen that in the past in a similar light with the college football playoff executive director in terms of how much power do they really have and how many people are really interested in it because of that. Our good friend Dennis Dodd, had a great list of guys. The one that I think stuck out to me that I think would make a lot of sense is Oliver Luck, the former West Virginia AD. He's worked at the NCAA. He's been a consultant in a lot of different ways. He's involved in companies like Altius, which is, involved with NIL. He's been as a consultant to the Pac-2 teams. He's been a consultant to the Mountain West. This guy's been everywhere. He's had pretty much every job you can possibly have in college football. I think he's someone who could fit. He's got relationships, knows how to manage a situation. That's one that I think out of the list that Dennis had that would make a lot of sense to me. But again, I'll just reiterate, how much power this position has will determine the amount of people who are interested in it. Nick Saban's not taking that job if he's not getting full power, and I don't see that job having full power.
Yeah, I second that name. Yeah. And I've worked with Oliver in XFL, and the one thing that Oliver always understood was just how are we going to make this more broader, and how can we get it out to the people and make it more easy accessible for the fans to understand like what the players are going through, because he's been a player, commissioner, lawyer. Mm-hmm. I think he understands like the full value of what we need to get college sports to. And it's back to being able to afford, young people being able to play, and alleviate the stress from the coaching staffs.
Yeah. John, real quick, a very important question, but before we go, who makes this hire, by the way?
Well, I mean, I think that's also part of the question, right? I think that, we expect, committee of people. I think it's going to be heavily skewed, and Dennis reported this too, I think heavily skewed with SEC and Big Ten folks. They've been the ones who I think are driving a lot of this. They've taken the kind of the lead on this situation, but that's ultimately one of the other things that we're going to figure out hopefully soon as to exactly who's making the power, who has the power to make this hire.
Yeah, even more consolidation of power between the SEC and Big Ten, which so far has been the theme of this show as we talk about the changing landscape of college football and college sports. John Talty, thank you so much. For those of you out there who might be wondering, how did we even get to this place? Well, thankfully, Talty and Armin Katayan wrote the book on it. So check out The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. You can find it wherever you get books these days.
Brad Crawford gives us his list of top 5 coaches under the most pressure for the 2025 season.
I'm going to start things off at number 5. Maybe a surprise pick here, LSU's Brian Kelly. His first 3 years with the Tigers have been fine. Fine's not good enough in Baton Rouge. 29 wins, 40 games, but no playoff appearances. LSU spent a considerable amount of cash in NIL this recruiting cycle to get a portal class it felt can compete in the SEC. They got Garrett Nussmeier back at quarterback. Brian Kelly, this is a must-get to the playoff win year in 2025. Moving to number 4, Wisconsin football under Luke Fickell has largely become irrelevant. Who saw this coming? Luke Fickell led Cincinnati, the first G5 program to reach the college football playoff against Bama here a couple of years ago, and since he left the Bearcats to take this Badgers job in the Big Ten, Wisconsin has not had a season ranked inside the top 20. Wisconsin this year, it's not getting any bit easier because the Big Ten has several playoff teams. The Badgers likely not one of them. At number 3 for me, coaches facing the most pressure, FSU's Mike Norvell. That's right, the guy in Tallahassee who went 13-1 2 years ago and then 2-10 last season. Has that ever happened? An unbeaten regular season, you win the ACC, and then you lose 10 games. A lot of misfortune in the portal the last cycle. 2 years ago, they did a good job, the coaching staff that is, at evaluating talent. Hopefully in 2025, FSU is back to being a contender in the ACC. At number 2, Oklahoma State's Mike Gundy. Before last season, Gundy had one losing campaign in Stillwater with the Cowboys, and that came way back in 2005. His first year. This program has never gone winless in the Big 12 until last season. So 2025 has to be a bounce back if you're Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy. And at number 1 in my list of coaches facing the most pressure ahead of 2025, there's one choice here. Oklahoma's Brent Venables. I know the buyout is considerable, but if he suffers a losing season for the 3rd time in 4 years at Oklahoma, the Sooners are going to be looking for a new head coach after the 2025 season. John Mateer, the Washington State quarterback transfer, he's got to be a guy. I mean, he can't just be, someone who comes in there and has 20 touchdown passes. He's got to have 30 to 32 touchdown passes for Oklahoma to be a major contender and Brent Venables to get off of the nation's hottest seat.
We love a good list in the offseason. Just to recap, these are the coaches that Brad Crawford believes are under the most pressure in 2025. He has Brent Venables there at the top, the Mikes, Mike Gundy, Mike Norvell behind him, Luke Fickell, and Brian Kelly is what Brad determined as his potential surprise pick. But we're gonna bring in a friend here to see if that is such a surprise. So we bring in Bud Elliott of the Cover 3 podcast to discuss some of these coaches. We haven't quite used the hot seat term yet, but you guys are more than welcome to throw that out there if you want to. Bud, before we go through this list 5 to 1, I want to get your take. Who is Brad maybe potentially missing on this list that you would add?
I think Brad's list actually is really good. I think there are a couple other guys who have maybe a different type of pressure. Billy Napier, being retained by Florida, but not extended. We'll have to see how much pressure's on him to actually, have a big time season since they kept DJ Lagway there in Gainesville. I'm interested in Sharon Moore. Like, certainly not, job security pressure, but, pressure to bounce back a little bit from the season they had coming off a national championship. And a step back was certainly expected, but now a step forward will be expected. I think James Franklin has a tremendous amount of pressure, right? Now that, hey, $3 million defensive coordinator, paying up to keep a lot of the guys from going to the NFL. James Franklin's another guy who I think maybe could have been on that list. Again, not hot seat pressure, but like legitimate job pressure due to expectations.
Yeah, the stove gets a little bit warm during this time because it's a lonely time during football, and everyone's getting picked apart. But the guy that I would say is Lincoln Riley. When you're brought out to USC, you're only there for one reason: national championship. And when you bring Caleb Williams with you, we won a national championship. So you've struggled with your defensive coordinator, poor hire. And when you're head coach, you get looked at as how do you hire your staff and how is your staff put together. And when you go with a record in the Big Ten of the 7-6, 8-5, that's not good enough. And when you're getting paid $11 million a year, I don't think we're getting paid $11 million just to go in the whatever bowl. So Lincoln Riley, seat is warming up.
Yeah, best 7-6 team, though, in the sport. Bud Elliott, let's go to number 5 here with Brian Kelly. It feels like he is pushing all of his chips into the table this year, adding his own money into the NIL fund, bringing in the number 1 transfer portal class. How much added pressure does doing that bring to him?
I think a ton. I don't really think they're going to fire Brian Kelly, but if they don't have a good season again, I could certainly see the argument for it, right? They've wasted 2 years of Daniels. You wasted a year of Nussmeier, who, if he had gone pro, would have certainly been a top 100 pick, if not maybe a second or maybe even a first round type pick. So you get him back. This is kind of the last chance. I don't really love what they have in their quarterback room. Obviously, the recruiting class fell apart a bit, so they had a bunch of extra money left over. They're like, maybe we should spend it on the transfer portal. And indeed, they finally did. I think they should have done it last year, but I guess better late than never. If Brian Kelly doesn't make the playoff, I do think you'll probably see some rumblings of like, hey, what are we doing here, right? Like, and he's really not doing better than Notre Dame's doing, certainly.
Man, listen, let's get this elephant out the room. You lost Bryce Underwood. Shame. You can't do that when you lose a generational type quarterback that could come down to your school and win all over. The last 3 coaches at LSU have all won national championship. Nick Saban, Les Miles, even Ed Orgeron. So if you've whiffed, and when you talk about coordinating your defense, it's looked pathetic. LSU's always been DBU, defensive U. And right now, everybody's just running roughshod right through that defense, and it looks bad. So, see, heating up.
Yeah. Brian Kelly's also never won an opener, but he has won all the closers. He's undefeated in bowl games, so just keeps getting better there. Let's go to Luke Fickell, who is at number 4, and I think this is kind of a bigger picture question about Wisconsin as a whole, so I'll lay it out like this, Bud. What should expectations be at Wisconsin, and how is he managing them?
Yeah, so Wisconsin's a team, if you go back to like the early 2000s, people are like, maybe they can finally make that jump to being a national title contender, because they would consistently win 8, 9, even 10 ball games under Barry Alvarez. I don't really have those type of expectations. The addition of Washington and Oregon and USC to the Big Ten kind of pushes them down a little bit in terms of program prestige, and just it makes the ceiling a little bit harder of a cap for them to push up and maybe win the league. But if I'm Wisconsin, I'm like, why can't we be Iowa? Why can't we be consistently a little bit better than a Minnesota? Right? What about being better consistently than in Nebraska? I think Fickell's a good football coach, but I do think that the staff he has at Wisconsin is probably not as good as the staff that he had in a couple of those years at Cincinnati when they really built a special team. And a lot of those guys now that he had with him at Cincy are scattered off to the NFL, or they're actually at Notre Dame.
Yeah, regardless of what we say, it's style of play in that Wisconsin that wins. And when you are going out there and you want to spin the ball all around the yard, Wisconsin fans aren't used to that. They're used to lining up, running the ball downhill, getting dirty yards with physical players from their state, and not losing 5 games in a row at the end of the season, and not playing the quality of defense that we've known Wisconsin to play. So yes, those pivotal games are important, but those fans and alums want to see the style of play back to what Wisconsin football and Badger football that we've known.
Yeah, that's a good point. We were all just worried that the air raid would be chilly up there, but also, it didn't work, and Wisconsin fans aren't quite used to that. At number 3, we have Mike Norvell. He, of course, is fresh off signing an extension last offseason as part of the reshuffling of the sport when Nick Saban retired. Also was coming off an ACC championship year and undefeated season, so definitely worthy of that, though. But, Bud, how much extra pressure does that add to Mike Norvell?
Yeah, you can't follow up a 2-10 a year by going like 4-8 or 5-7. Norvell's buyout, I think, is prohibitive unless they have another terrible season. If they do, I would expect the AD to be fired as well in Tallahassee. You don't typically get to make back-to-back hires if your hire ended up being a disaster. Norvell does have the 13-0. He also won 10 games the year prior, and he went to the Cotton Bowl at Memphis. So the overall track record, I think, on his career is great, but his time in Tallahassee has not been great. So we'll have to see. Is he closer to what he was in 2023, or is he closer to what he was in 2024? I think they'll have a bounce back because they've done a decent job in the portal, I think, but I certainly don't think that they are really building towards a national title. So, long term, it's hard to see this being a great, lasting relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be fired right after this year.
Yeah, competitive play is my biggest thing. When you cut the film on, you watch those games last year, they weren't competitive. The stands were empty, and you can hear everybody having a conversation in there. And then personnel. They brought in the wrong quarterback, didn't pay the right quarterback, and their defensive line that they paid so much money for to apply pressure and stop the run got ran through. So, yes, the pressure's on, not because of only your record, but what the product looks like that you went out and paid for single-handedly and got that done.
Totally agree. I think, and something we brought up last year before the season, like when your best players are among your worst leaders, that can be a problem because obviously, you have to keep them talent-wise. You can't just let them walk out. Or I guess you could, but then how competitive are you going to be from a physicality and speed standpoint? But the guys they had to pay last year were certainly not big-time leaders, and that really bit them, I think. That team quit.
Yeah, leadership comes down to your coach. And one of your abilities as a head coach that you have to do is you have to be able to understand the character of your leaders. And when you give that away and you say, well, the highest paid guys are our leaders, sometimes they're the worst ones. Because your job is to understand the heartbeat of your team. And when you don't understand the heartbeat of your team, what happens is you start seeing that product that we saw last year on the football field was non-competitive play. On the defensive side, offensive side, and the big money guys just didn't show up and they barely just quit on you.
Yeah, that undefeated season really buying him a lot of goodwill because if you look at this Florida State team under Mike Norvell, he actually has more losing seasons than winning seasons. But that's a good point. We always talk about bringing in transfer portal guys. You got to bring in the right guys, too. Certainly not the case last year. Hoping that changes this year. But let's go on to our other Mike at number 2, Mike Gundy with the off-season standoff, as I think we had coined it there. How does everything that happened in the off-season with him, affect his potential future?
I think it's a kind of rocky for him at Oklahoma State right now. The guy's a legend. Obviously, he played there. He's been one of the most successful coaches in Oklahoma State history. But much like Florida State was this year, that team looked like they kind of quit at times last year. They were just so not competitive, which was shocking. Much like FSU for one of the preseason conference favorites. I'm interested to see how Gundy will handle NIL going forward. As Emily mentioned, the standoff there was that was certainly something to behold. But he's back, and we'll see. My guess is they'll bounce back because Gundy teams typically bounce back. They do kind of go up and down a good bit, which is something that happens if you don't recruit at a super elite level. Like you're a little more beholden to the variance that we have now with the transitory nature of these rosters in this sport. But I think they'll probably bounce back some. But that was a wild offseason for them already.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a standoff. They basically said, give us our money back or walk out of the door. Mm-hmm. And he said, you know what? Just for the time being, I'll give some of it back. But what Coach Gundy has to do, he has to evolve and understand that college football is taking a new turn. And it's becoming more player-driven than coach-driven. And that's allocating your funds and recruiting the right guys and just not taking everyone that comes into your front door and say, you're going to be a player because I can make you into a player. Mm-hmm. Last year, they had the most veteran offensive line that they possibly can have in the last few years with an NFL running back behind them, and they still struggled. So when you look at it as a fan, or just me and you right now, but just looking at it, like, how does it even get better? Your better players are leaving. Veteran football is what wins in college. We saw it with Ohio State, but you still lost with that. And then we asked you to give us some of our money back, and you did that. So really, we're just waiting for your time just to run out so we can ask you to leave and walk out of the door.
I think that definitely signaled a strained relationship there at Oklahoma State. Let's go to number 1. We have Oklahoma's Brent Venables. And for that, we want to bring in one more voice to this because we've got somebody boots on the ground there. Let's welcome in Tom Green from Sooners Illustrated. And Tom, I want to start with the local perspective. I mean, you're around the program, you talk to fans, you hear what they have to say. So what kind of pressure do you believe that Brent Venables is facing headed into 2025?
I mean, it's definitely immense pressure, and I think some of that he's put on himself. You're looking at he's been there for 3 years. They've had 2 losing seasons in those 3 years with a 10-win season sandwiched in the middle there. He's 0-3 in bowl games, and for the second straight year, he's having to replace both offensive and defensive coordinators. And, this offseason, he's taken it upon himself to take over defensive play calling again and make himself the defensive coordinator. So there's a lot of pressure. And look, he's done a lot of things well to turn this defense around since he's taken over. It's the best it's been since he was here as a defensive coordinator more than a decade ago. But the offense has been uneven through the first couple seasons. And then last season was the worst in more than 25 years. So if they can't turn things around offensively, his seat's going to get very warm.
Totally agree with Tom there. If you look at this, I mean, you have a good number of guys off that staff, both front office and the coaching staff, leaving for positions that I think are probably not lateral. Like, they're downgrades, but guys are jumping ship because as a coach, you got to look around, right? You got a family to worry about. Like, this guy's probably getting fired. So I need to get out. I need to get a new 2-3 year deal somewhere else, maybe somewhere where it won't be micromanaged quite so much, which that happens. I mean, I like that if you're a first time head coach, you're going to want to have control of everything. Like, you really think, hey, I got to do it all myself. And we'll see how Venables evolves as a head coach. But some of the stuff there was not his fault. Like, all the receivers getting hurt this year was not Brent Venables' fault. His choice of offensive coordinator, that's on him. His handling of the Jackson Arnold situation, that's on him. Their misevaluations of the offensive lineman in the transfer portal when other staffs we knew were like, what the heck? Like, they're taking that kid over that kid? Like, that's bad. That's on him. So the receivers all getting hurt, I can't put that on him. But the rest of it, it's just not up to the standard that Oklahoma expects.
Yeah, so 2 things. Personnel, like you said, receiver play and O-line play and quarterback play, not up to par for any standard for a real P4 program. That looked like a G5 program when you cut the film on and watched it. And the first sign of pressure is whenever a coach says, you know what, I'm going to take back over a side of the ball and I'm going to call the defense or offense. As a coach, your job is to coach the coaches, not to coach the players. It's a head coach. That's what your position coaches do. And now you coach your coordinators on what you want them to do. But the pressure starts applying when you start saying, I'm going to do everything by myself, for myself, because there's a lot of time that you have to do when you become a defensive or offensive coordinator during the week, and you just don't have enough time for that.
I don't really hate the idea of Venables calling the defense, to be honest. Like that's the only thing that we know he's actually good at. Like, there's zero evidence, that Venables can be a head coach at all. Like, there's hope, right? There's certainly hope in Norman that he can, but like, we know this guy is one of the very best guys ever to coordinate a defense in the history of the sport of college football. Like, given the guys that he brought back, like, we know he loves Wes Goodwin. That was his boy when he was at Clemson. Like, they would talk over other coaches in the meetings and have, really good, like, defensive scheme chat from what I was told in those. To me, it's like, does he let Arbuckle call the offense? Like, is he meddling over there? How have they done in terms of the offensive line evaluations? Do they actually stay healthy at receiver? Like, do people enjoy working for this guy? That's like the one thing he's actually good at, I think, is calling a defense. If he's going to go down, I think he's going to go down swinging. I don't hate him calling the defense.
Tom, what's your take on Venables taking over the defense?
I was going to say, when Zach Alley left for West Virginia, it was a bit of a head scratcher. Obviously, he worked with Rich Rod before at Jacksonville State, and ULM, but it was definitely a head scratcher. And look, Brent Venables took his swing at Jim Knowles, trying to get him to come over from Ohio State. And once that kind of didn't materialize, it's like, look, if you're not going to get a Jim Knowles type to take over this defense, who better to call it than Brent Venables, who has been one of the best defensive minds in college football over the last quarter century. So he's making a big bet on himself. And look, they have a lot of continuity on that side of the ball. Obviously, they lose Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman, and a few other pieces, but they bring back a lot of guys, and they feel really good about that defense. And look, for a lot of these guys, it's their second, third, fourth year in Brent Venables' system, so they know the terminology. They understand that defense a lot better, which should make it a lot easier for him as he's kind of taken over that side of the ball a little bit more.
Yeah, if Brent Venables were still just a defensive coordinator, all would be good, but he is overseeing the entire program, so got to get that offense figured out. But Elliott, thank you for joining us here. We appreciate it. You can check out more of his work on the Cover 3 podcast. Tom, you're not going anywhere because we have to continually talk about this Oklahoma team, which is why we brought you on here. You mentioned all the changes specifically at the coordinator positions, but let's talk about personnel. 15 players coming in. We'll start there, including the new quarterback, John Mateer. So where did Oklahoma get better in this offseason?
I think they got better at quarterback. Look, they had high hopes for Jackson Arnold. He was obviously a 5-star prospect coming in. He was the heir apparent for Dylan Gabriel after he left, and they felt really good about him, and it just didn't materialize. And part of that was because Brent Venables made a poor hire at offensive coordinator Seth Luttrell and had to fire him. Basically midway through the season. But after bringing in Ben Arbuckle as a new offensive coordinator, to be able to land John Mateer, who was one of the best quarterbacks and certainly one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country last season, to kind of have that pairing of quarterback and offensive coordinator in hopes of turning things around on offense, I think that is probably their without a doubt their biggest hit in the portal, and what they're banking on being their biggest hit. But there's a lot of other pieces that they brought in that they're going to be relying on, especially on offense. They had to completely make over the wide receiver room just about. They had 5-6 guys depart. They brought in 4 wide receivers, and they're bringing a couple guys back. But you're counting on a couple guys who are like FCS All-Americans, whether it's Keontae Lewis, Giovanni Gibson. You're bringing in a guy with SEC experience and Isaiah Satania, and another P4 type player in Josiah Martin from Cal. But you have a lot of holes that you need to fill, because this offensive struggles last year weren't just on the play of Jackson Arnold and Mike Hawkins Jr. Like, there were a lot of issues with that offense that they're trying to fix this year.
Yeah, one of those issues that Bud noted was the offensive line and how they kind of miscalculated the players that they brought in. You added Michael Fasusi. I mean, overall, how do you think this rebuilt offensive line will perform in 25?
Yeah, you kind of have to hope that a lot of these guys take a step forward. You're bringing back Troy Everett at center, who missed the start of last season, but then took over and kind of brought some stability to the line. The left side of the line, they had 2 guys who were redshirt freshmen last year who really improved over the back half of the season in Heath Ozida and Logan Howland, and you're banking on those guys to continue in their development, because they can be SEC caliber, quality players in this league. The right side, I think there's a little bit more question, even though you're bringing back Febechi Wewu, who started every game at right guard and played more snaps along the offensive line than anybody there last season. But then you're bringing in Derek Simmons, a transfer from Western Carolina, who you're probably going to plug in at right tackle, because you're losing 2-3 guys there between Michael Tarquin and Spencer Brown. And you need this line to really take a step forward, and you're banking a lot on Bill Bedenbaugh's reputation and his ability to develop guys. Certainly having a few of these guys that are in their 3rd year in the system, you're hoping that they're able to take that next step, while guys like Michael Fasusi and Ryan Foje kind of come along and develop behind them in this 2025 class that they feel really strong about.
Right, so the transfer portal giveth and it taketh away, and man, it took away a lot from Oklahoma. 26 outgoing transfers. Where will they feel the effects of those losses the most?
Yeah, part of it is the offense. Obviously, like, you're losing the Jackson Arnold. You're remaking your entire quarterback room essentially. Only really bringing back Michael Hawkins, and John Mateer is going to be starting there. But you look at the wide receiver position and just tight end too. I know a lot of these guys were injured last year and missed all or most of the season, but Nick Anderson was a guy who caught 10 touchdowns in 2023, and when healthy, he can be an All-American type receiver. Jalil Farouk was one of their top receivers for the last 3 years, and he's off to Maryland now. Andrel Anthony, former transfer from Michigan, he was their leading receiver through the first half of 2023 before he tore up his ACL and then missed basically all of this last season too. Brendan Thompson was one of their top receivers this past season, so was J.J. Hester. And you're replacing all those guys and basically bringing in a fresh slate of players. You're only really bringing back Deion Burks, who transferred in from Purdue but missed most of last season, and then Jaden Gibson, who kind of had a mini breakout in 2023 but tore his patellar tendon in fall camp last season and missed the entire year. So it's hard to say that you're really going to miss all these receivers when nobody was really healthy last season. But a lot of these guys, when they were healthy before, they showed they can be productive, and you have to replace that.
You've been missing those receivers all fall, really. So what's the difference? That's a good point there. As you look at this schedule, you talk to fans, you generally just spend time around this program. What are expectations for this upcoming season?
Yeah, look, again, they're facing one of the toughest schedules in college football. That non-conference game against Michigan looms large too early in the season. But after two of the last 3 seasons, being below 500, winning just 6 games in the regular season, I think you need to look at this as you need to win at least 8 games to feel good about the direction of this program right now. Even with the schedule as tough as it is, you're going to have to win some tough games in the SEC to be competitive and show that this program is heading in the right direction under Brent Venables.
All right, you laid it out for us. A lot of pressure on Brent Venables and a tough schedule if he's going to prove the doubters wrong. Tom Green, thank you so much for being here. You can check out more of his work at SoonersIllustrated.com. Keep it locked in for everything Oklahoma. It could be a make-or-break season for the Sooners and their head coach, so check it all out at SoonersIllustrated.com. All right, so Smoke is so patiently waiting and sitting here and listening to that great conversation, gathering all of his thoughts, because Tom makes a lot of great points. But when you look at this Sooners team as a whole, and if we can pop up the schedule again just so you can get another look at what they're facing this year, because it's a lot of pressure and a lot of tough competition. What is your prediction for Oklahoma this season?
They'll win 6 games max.
Max?
Yeah, that's a tough schedule.
Yeah.
And that team's not good when you talk about in terms of personnel. And again, when you start hitting the panic button, that's when your head coach starts taking over a side of the ball. When you start taking over a side of the ball, that means you lose all focus on what you are, and that's the overall leader of your program. So you're not paying that much attention to personnel. You're not paying that much attention to the kicking game, nor are you paying attention to what's happening on the offensive side. Because you have to have the heartbeat of your team. And I don't care how well you say, I can do this and that. No, you can't. None of us are that good to be able to stretch ourselves so thin in 24 hours to get the job that we want to get done and lead a A1 program, a blue blood program, back into what we want to see Oklahoma get to. And that's the college football playoffs and bring home a national championship.
What do you think about Bud's argument, though, that maybe taking him away from dealing with the offensive side of the ball could actually be a good thing and that he won't have his hands in that?
Well, the best person that we can look at is Steve Sarkisian. You go back and you watch that game that they lost. The play before the half, if you're looking at the game in totality, you'll look at your coordinator and whatever he called. If he called the press, you say, hey, hold on. No, can't call that. Just call safe defense, and let's get to the half and figure this game out again. If you're looking at the flow of the game when you're down there in the red zone at the 1 yard line, you step back as a play call and said, this team, we have the momentum. We don't need to go horizontal to get a yard. Let's go downhill. But when you're a play caller, you're trapped in your mind of calling the game against your opponent across the way. That's not your job. Your job is to sit back and have the viewpoint of your entire team to make sure that we come out of here with the W. And really, a head coach, you have 4 to 5 plays or situations that you really need to be involved in. The rest of the game, you're just allowing your coaches to do what they need to do and interject when needed.
All right. Smoke Dixon saying 6 wins max for Oklahoma. Is this somebody who spent time in a front office in the SEC and the Big Ten? He knows what he's talking about. We'll see what happens with the Sooners in 2025. But I want to pivot to looking at the future stars of the sport, which is what we love to do here at 24/7 Sports. And look no further than offensive lineman Ekene Ogboko, the number 2 interior O lineman in the 2026 class, is a star for his South Garner team and is looking for his next challenge, college. Our Tom Loy caught up with Ogboko as he revealed his top 4 schools.
Top 247 offensive lineman Ekene Ogboko, always good to catch up with you. You are the number 21 overall player in the class of 2026. So naturally, you're going to have a lot of offers, but there are 4 schools to keep an eye on. You reached out. You said you got some big news. You said you've got 4 official visits lined up. So let's dive into them one by one. The first trip you're taking is to Clemson on May 30th. What has you so excited about checking out the Tigers?
What has me excited is the program they're building there and the program they already established there with Coach Sweeney and what's called the program they have throughout the years. And also Coach Luke, the offensive line coach there, we have established a good relationship, and I really like him. And I like what he can do for me, how he can develop me. He has shown he got guys in the league from like Georgia, with Maurice Mims, and what's called Jones Broderick, I think Broderick Jones. So guys like that. So that really excites me about Clemson.
So Clemson's locked in. After that, you're headed to Alabama on June 7th. What has you so excited at getting around the Crimson Tide?
Alabama with what's called the standard they have there already and the standard they built. I really love that standard. I love like a winning culture. And also with Coach Cap. Coach Cap is a great coach. Got to talk to him for a few times. I went down there for their what is called Junior Day with my mom. It was a great visit. I really enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun. And just Alabama's just a great place, and I definitely want to go check it out some more.
After that, you're headed to Athens. I know you got some family ties here. You're going to visit Georgia on June 13th. What is it about the Bulldogs that has you fired up?
The Bulldogs, and it's like my brother goes there. Also, just like it's like a family there. It's like a home. So I'm saying, so I always love when I go to Georgia and Coach Searles. I like what he's building over there, and Coach Kirby and just Coach Smart and just the relationship we have with him, and just what we're doing and trying to build a relationship there, and just I really like Georgia and the Dogs. You can see you get a lot of Dogs in the NFL, and so that's a dream of mine. So I like the Dogs.
As it stands right now, your final trip is to Notre Dame on June 20th. What are you most looking forward to about another trip to South Bend?
With South Bend, Coach Freeman actually came down, had a visit to South Garner not too long ago during that contact period. Got to talk to him, pick his mind a little bit about what he likes about me and just South and Notre Dame and what they're building down there. I really like it, like the whole program. I'm a Christian Catholic, so it works out for me and my mom and my family, my religious, and just what they're doing there with the O-line with Coach Rudolph. I like that a lot, and so it definitely enticed me to get down there some more.
Now, you told me that your commitment date is kind of up in the air. It could come this summer, it could come after these trips, or you may even add a couple of official visits and maybe take some trips into the fall. Who are a couple other schools that you're talking to, or at least considering potentially taking official visits to outside of this 4?
Some schools I talk to about taking official visits right now is South Carolina. They're really big on my list with Coach Teasley, Coach Beamer. I really like them. I'll probably do like an in-season visit with them because my mom never been to a game visit with them. So that'll be a good experience for me and my mom, my family to go experience that a game day with South Carolina. So I'll probably talk to them. And then also I'll talk to NC State. I like them a lot. They're talking to me right now. We haven't set an official visit yet, but it could be one set soon. So I definitely like NC State. And also, I'm planning something with Ohio State. So I'm talking to Coach Bowen. He talked to me yesterday. So we're trying to build a relationship there and see if anything shows up with Ohio State.
When you and your family are behind closed doors, when you're talking to people close to you, what's your checklist? What's your criteria of things that you're looking for that each school, that you need at each school when you make a decision?
First, I just like the coach-player relationship. Like, I gotta trust my coach that he can trust me. I can also trust him to develop me and get me better. And like when I talk about development, talking about how getting to the league and just show me what I can work on, what I can do. And also, I also like a winning culture, a school that's trying to win a national championship obviously every year or compete for it every year. And so like they have that culture already built there. And also school academics. I'm a big academic guy. My mom's a teacher. And so we always, hard on academics. So I want to keep a school with good academics. And then also I would say just a place I can vibe in, I can fit in with. Like I can see my personality fit in with the teammates there or the guys already there. So I can actually like fit in with that culture room, like that a locker room vibe, that culture that I can just really vibe with.
You mentioned vibe. You talked about that a couple of times. I'm going to put your feet to the fire a little bit. You got some great head coaches. Talked about Marcus Freeman, Kalen DeBoer, Dabo Sweeney, Kirby Smart. Is there one head coach in particular that you feel like you're connecting with and have the best relationship at this point?
The best relationship. I wouldn't say like it's one clear top, but I would just say the one that I probably like know the most is probably Coach Smart because this was my brother and his recruitment. So I probably talked to Coach Smart like the most just because before Sweeney came in, I was already with Coach Smart with my brother. So I think that's why we probably got more of a like deeper relationship. But I wouldn't say like he's a top most out of all of them.
And lastly, tell the fans a little bit about yourself. When you pick a school, what can that fan base expect from you, both as a player but also as a person?
Whatever fan base I go to, I can expect me to always show out, go hard, fun guy, off and on the field, nice guy. I'm Nigerian, so you know what I'm saying, I might wear some Nigerian clothes, Niger, stand up. I'm gonna just have the vibes, energy, and just go out there and compete every day.
Ekene, always a pleasure, man. Thank you for taking the time. Now we will head back to you all in the studio.
Thank you so much, Tom. So it'll all come down to these four. First up, Clemson on May 30th. Then he goes to Alabama June 7th, Georgia the 13th, and Notre Dame on June 20th. Those are not technically his finalists, but those are the schools that he is, of course, most interested in and talked to our Tom Loy about. You know this kid pretty well.
A little bit.
What do you think of this prospect? Tell us the background first real quick.
Oh, man, I remember recruiting he and his older brother.
Okay.
And the older brother walked through the room, 6'3", 310 pounds, giant of a person. Mm-hmm. Then you see another guy has to duck his head to come through the door, and I'm like, the baby is the one. Both of them good players, but the baby's one. But the thing that separates them is you don't see people walking around that looks like that and that can move like that and can bend with the ability to have body balance control. What I mean by that is his ability to get onto a defender, have the defender throw him all around in different directions, but still maintain his balance and finish with a block with perfect balance. It's an innate ability to do so, but it takes a great athlete in order to do that when you're 6'6", length, and over close to 300 pounds.
Yeah, it's one thing to be big. It's another thing to be able to know how to use it. Sounds like he's got it going on. Awesome. Thank you, Smoke. It's the end of our show, which means it's time to get to some burning questions. And it's special this week because you submitted those questions on our Instagram page, at the 247 Sports Instagram page. So if you have any more questions, you can submit them on our story right now. But if you're watching us, go ahead and hit that like button. That's something you can do immediately that will help us out. Our first burning question: how long will Bill Belichick last at North Carolina?
One and done.
1 year?
One and done. This is Carmelo back when he left Syracuse and went straight to the pros. And what I mean by that in all seriousness, all Bill Belichick knows is the Patriot way. The Patriot way does not fly in college football because a lot of these kids don't truly love football. They just like it enough just to go to school and to take care of their education. And a few of us are dreaming of the NFL. But when you're beating and just drumming away Patriot way, Patriot way, Patriot, these 18 to 22-year-old kids don't have a clue what that means. So you're beating something in my head. It's the worst time right now of the season because we don't have pads on. The outlook of us going into pads, we hate. We don't know who you are because we didn't come to school to play for you. We came to play for Mac. You and Mac are two totally different people. You beat us up every single day, preaching a way that none of us know about except our parents. And the only time that you've ever had success with that Patriot way is when Tom Brady was on that team. So one and done, not because he can't coach, because he can. It's his ability to adapt to what college football is, and that's driven by players, not by coaches. It's a partnership, not a dictatorship.
Yeah. Also, Bill Belichick turning 73 in April before he coaches his first season. So, one and done for Bill Belichick. See, this is why we ask the burning questions. Our next one here are, who are some coaches with the most to prove in 2025? We talked about the hot seat, but who's got something to prove?
Well, I'm going to start out with Kalen DeBoer. And the reason why I say that he needs to start this out on the right track is because how last season ended. You were the 13th team, one away from getting into the college football playoffs. You went into the bowl game and got punished, beaten up physically by a team that only could run the football, and you knew exactly what they were going to do, and you came out on the short end of the stick. You had a quarterback that might be in the top 2 rounds in the NFL draft. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it, it's a formula of what happened to Florida State a few years ago. If you don't get this thing back and lead your team in the right way, you might be looking at a 4-win season. A lot to prove.
4 for Alabama?
I'm telling you, morale goes quickly. New coordinator, old coordinator on staff, new coordinators put every offensive coach on notice. You got struggled with explosive. Running back coach, you struggled with your running backs creating explosive plays and finishing runs, and we didn't protect well enough. So, I mean, I'm not the wisest guy in the world. But when you bring in somebody in new and demote the guy that was there doing the job that he struggled at, there's a lot to prove, and it starts with the head guy.
All right. Next question here is, how many Big 12 teams will make the playoff this year?
1.
Who?
Arizona State.
Again.
Okay. They're the only ones out there that really have a true chance at getting back in. For one, head coach love him. Energy that he brings, and he understands what it's all about. It's about personnel. Quarterback is back. Leading receiver is back. They went out in the transfer portal and got a running back to replace the production of the running back that's leaving. And they addressed their needs in the transfer portal with offensive line, defensive line, and a few skill guys that they needed. So Arizona State, back at it. Kenny Dillingham, pressure's on you. Not me.
Well, you put it on him, so very nice of you to do that. Once again, these questions are courtesy of you all who asked us on Instagram, and this one was very specific. They want to know which freshman you are most excited about. Give us somebody on offense and on defense.
Keelan Russell.
Okay.
I just want to see how he adapts to playing football at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa, because I saw one of the biggest jumps from a player from his junior year to his senior year. And I'm just anticipating seeing his growth once he gets to college and learns how to prepare like a true pro. And he works at this thing every day. The rumbles I'm getting out of Tuscaloosa, he might be the next one. So I'm just anticipating that, and I'm ready to see it.
Good enough to win them more than 4 games, hopefully?
It's a freshman. That's a lot to ask for a freshman to do.
Okay, how about on defense?
Jonah Williams. And this is one of the guys that I just love watching play in high school, because he did not look like a high school football player. It was the rest of them, then he stood out. Like, if I brought you to and said, you know what, Emily, we're going to watch football. We're going to just evaluate players. I'm not even going to tell you who we're looking at. Jonah would have jumped off that film and said, hey, who's that guy? Height, weight, speed, explosiveness, change of direction. I don't know what he's going to play, but he's going to play something. And when he arrives with bad intention, violence, and a bad attitude.
But that's a good thing in this case.
That's a phenomenal thing.
It's a phenomenal thing. I heard a lot of bad, but we need to clarify that that's all good to have.
Bad is good in our world.
I love it. All right, those are the burning questions. If you have any, make sure to submit them on the 247 Sports Instagram page. We have a story up right now. You can just respond to it, and we will take your burning questions on Wednesday when we're back here for the Ultimate College Football Show. Make sure that you are subscribed to the 247 Sports YouTube channel. Also, make sure you hit the like button one more time on the way out and join us every Monday and Wednesday. Thanks for watching.